All right, gang. Getting ready to record for our first episode of the new podcast. As many of you know, I had a podcast going, podcast, East Coast, West Coast, podcast. I had a podcast going last year, and I had some major, once I started doing it, I noticed some major tweaks I wanted to make. So I finally gotten around to wanting to get back out there, start a new podcast with those tweaks made. We got Wolverine here in Waj, Denver, Bisco Disco, the Spoopster, Jeff, Sergio, Sean, PZ, Josh, Father Anderson. Oh, Father Anderson's here. So this is like the pre-show time. None of this, of course, is going into the podcast. But as we record these, we'll have this pre-show time where we're just getting set up. We're hoping Susan sends out notification, things along those lines. And then we will also have a post-show section as well. And that will be for... there we go. We have a mod in here. Lude made it. That will be for... Once we start the actual recording of the podcast, if we get super chats that are just random jokes or stuff like that. Now, I don't turn the super chats off only because when we have these topical conversations, a lot of people want to use them to make what are typically really strong points one way or the other. So I don't want to have them off, but we got to get people used to the fact that these aren't our typical live streams. And so if they make jokes or things like that that wouldn't be necessarily appropriate for the podcast, we'll use the after show portion of this live stream to catch up on all those, because we'll make sure that all super chats, of course, are read. Yeah, Lude, I've been thinking about bringing it back, and this, I would have given you guys more of a heads up, but I just had things change in my own schedule where I was able to do it today, and you guys know how sometimes difficult it is for me scheduling. So I've been wanting to put this podcast first episode up for quite some time. So now we'll get to do it. And again, we can take as long as we want here in the pre-show area to get everything ready, get everybody jazzed up for it. And then we'll actually have the podcast eventually. And I'll be talking about this during the podcast. Eventually, these will have a regular schedule, both the recordings and the uploading. This podcast today will be scheduled to go out at 6 p.m. tonight, my time. 6 p.m. Mondays will be one of the podcast releases. For right now, I can give you guys the link where you can go in, because you may be part of the podcast as it unfolds. They're at Buzzsprout. I'm going to have a few episodes up before I start distributing them out to Apple and all the podcast locations. But here's the link for anybody that wants to check out the Buzzsprout area. That's the podcast home, as it was for the last one. So you can follow that to keep up on the actual podcast themselves. I would say 4chan is worse, but I don't know. I don't have Twitter. Collector says, well, we're going to talk about all that as we get into the podcast, and that's why I wanted to do them this way, so I can have you guys' feedback here. Let me move this over a little bit so I can see you guys easier. Yeah, TikTok. Yeah, I would agree. But again, we're going to get started with it shortly. Loot, and Lex are both here. You guys know it's the same routine as last time. With once we start the podcast, people are allowed to say whatever they want. If the stuff is wildly off topic, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm not going to bring it in as part of the podcast. If somebody super chats something that is wildly off topic and won't fit within the podcast, if you guys would, you can just let them know that after the podcast recording portion of the live stream, the after show, I will catch up. I have a tab open right now to grab all super chats, and I will catch up with their super chat at the end. Like, again, say it's just one of the random jokes or something. I never want to have a live stream where the super chats don't get read, so it will be at the end of the show. Let's see. It's that persona. We got a good crew in here. Let's actually, if you guys are ready, let's get started on the podcast. Again, pre-show now. We'll do the podcast recording. We'll have a little post show where we can chat about whatever. But I've been wanting to do this for some time, and I think we'll have a lot of fun with it. Eventually, this podcast, if it does well, will move. It won't be here at YouTube. It will be through Crowdcast, because Crowdcast is a superior streaming system. But for now, A, we need to build a following for the podcast before we could put it on Crowdcast. And B, yeah, B, B, I've completely forgotten. We had to build a following. Oh, and Crowdcast is rather expensive, so I want to make sure the podcast is going to at least help support itself. We'll keep my penis in my pants until such time as it's deemed appropriate to whip it out. Well, thank you, Lud. I appreciate that. All right, here we go. Let's get ready for the podcast portion of the show. Put this over here. Move this there. Okay, guys. Everybody ready? You can all, like I say, you can all will be part of the podcast itself as we go forward. Give a little countdown and we're ready to go. All right, everybody, here we go. This is episode 1 of the Curtis Candy podcast. For those of you who don't know, our podcast is recorded as part of live streams over at our YouTube channel, which for any of you who would like to come check it out, it's youtube.com/spazboyscomedy. This will not be the permanent home of the podcast. It will eventually be moving to Crowdcast, which is a superior streaming system. But all you have to do is follow along either we will have this podcast listed with all your favorite areas for podcasts, all your favorite providers for podcasts. Right now, it resides at Buzzsprout, and you can get the link in anything we produce. You can see the video version of this live stream recording at our channel, but we will be at Buzzsprout. Search Curtis Candy Podcast, but eventually we'll branch out and get into all the major providers. Today, we are going to be talking about what is the worst, most toxic social media platform, and why is it Twitter? To me, that's an easy one. Worst, most toxic, not even a contest. Then I also want to talk about a young woman who is a recent winner of the Scripps National Spelling Bee. She's a cool story. Seems like a really good kid. I just thought it'd be fun for anybody that doesn't know about it. You should check her out. It was pretty cool what she accomplished. And then we're also going to be talking voter suppression laws. This is in response to a conversation that took place in the comment section of one of our prior live streams, where the gang just was going back and forth about voter suppression laws. And I think it's something really interesting to talk about. I believe that it is also yet another area in which there is a clear and obvious middle ground that nobody wants anything to do with. Because, again, we know that politics currently must be one side versus the other. There's no reason to find middle ground. We know how that works. And I will be reading comments. Our podcast is totally interactive with you guys. When we make the move to Crowdcast, it will be even more so for the recordings, because I will be able to allow you guys to come in via face and voice or just voice. But one of our crew here, secret agent Randy Bean, says Club Penguin's by far, as far as the most toxic social media platform. For any of you who don't know, Club Penguin is an online game for kids that my own son managed to get banned from when he was 9, but that's an entirely different story. Let me lead into talking about our most toxic social media platform, and I will get to you guys' comments as soon as I give everybody a basic background of why I'm bringing this up and why I believe that Twitter is such garbage. First of all, the Twitter landscape is littered by, I think, some of the most toxic, most obnoxious, most basically useless people on the internet are people that have cultivated a Twitter following by being Twitter users. And by that I mean Twitter's a great place for people who have a public profile already, whether you're an actor, an athlete, an entertainer, whatever the case may be, a business owner. Twitter is an excellent place to network and to keep your name, your face, your brand out there. But within this world, we have people who have built up a Twitter following just by being on Twitter. And it seems to me that these are typically some of the lowest lives of the internet, because it's kind of a leeching, kind of sleazy method of trying to spread the word around. And the only way you are able to create that kind of following, that type of following on Twitter, is to be hyperbolic. You have to be over the top, whatever your issue is. Most notably, and I don't mean to pick on one specific group, but most notably, more people have gone that route with the Orange Man bad thing while Trump was president, and to this day still try and feed off it, which is why his name stays as pertinent as it does in the media and certainly on social media, because it's good for their brand. It's good for their following. So you got these people that were able to create a following just because they talk a lot of crap. They aren't really typically all that interested in facts. And when facts are involved, the facts are usually twisted greatly to fit their specific narrative. And then within that group are the ones who will stalk someone that does have a high profile, trying to get a following built on being the counter to that person. Once again, Trump comes to mind, but that happens all over. It can be either side of the political aisle, it can be actors, athletes, anyone. People will stalk people with a large following and comment immediately. I mean, they apparently follow them like mental patients, like they have a serious issue, because the moment that their target tweets something, they're immediately responding with something that they hope will gain a large number of those precious likes from people who also disagree with whoever the original poster was. So because of that, and because of the fact that politically speaking, no matter which side of the aisle you're on Twitter, the vast majority of people there are so far gone and so out of touch with reality when it comes to their politics that it's just become almost laughable. Well, not almost laughable, it is laughable. I spend a lot of my time just reading posts, reading tweets, and the responses to tweets that I know will just be loaded with these people that are absolutely psychotic. I mean, the anti-Trumpers, the pro-Trumpers, those are the two that I think are most notorious. And you have this one group that wants to turn everything into a discussion about Trump. Somebody can come out and tweet something like, gosh, it's a beautiful day out. And I guarantee you, not many tweets down in responses, you will see somebody say, yeah, it would be a nice day if it weren't for Orange Man. If we didn't have to put up with Trump for 4 years, it could have been a nice day, but it isn't, because they have to, that's what has to, the world has to revolve around Trump. And then you have the opposite side of the coin. The people that will respond to a post that says, boy, it's a beautiful day out today, and say, well, it would be if it weren't for the fact that Trump is no longer president. I mean, how he obviously got at least 10 million more votes than Biden. The dishonesty in the last election was so obvious, so rampant, and you have to be completely blind not to see it, and that's all you get. And smaller versions of that. But those people, while stupid, are not even the worst of it. I honestly believe, and I want to know what you guys think, I honestly believe some of the to me, it just strikes me as sleazy. Some of the sleaziest people are those who have built up huge Twitter followings simply by having a Twitter and stalking others. Now, I'm going to turn to the comments here. Am I wrong? Is there a worse social media platform out there? Am I wrong about these people that I'm talking specifically to at Twitter? What do you guys think? Chrome says, I'm not sure if I necessarily agree. Now, a lot of these names you'll hear me saying, for those of you on the podcast, these are screen names because, again, we record these podcast episodes on YouTube, so I'm reading people's screen names. Chrome says, I'm not sure if I necessarily agree it's the vast majority of people. It's a sizable portion, of course, but the issue is the select few who are super vocal and basically live on Twitter. I don't 100% disagree with that. Maybe I'm taking it too far saying it's a majority. I'd be comfortable with saying it's a split. I'll put it that way. Because and the only reason I say I still think it's a split, Chrome, is I believe a lot of the people who don't conduct themselves that way have left Twitter. I'm still on it, but I'm still on it basically because I utilize it for notifying people when we posted a new video at the channel and stuff like that. I rarely go on outside of that, even like with posting, if I find something humorous or have a goofy picture to post. You guys know the stuff that I put on Twitter. I typically take that over to our Patreon now. That's associated with the channel. We call it the Goosh. I take it over there because that's my community. That's people I really enjoy hanging out with. Or I share it even here at the YouTube channel in the form of some of our polls that we take and things like that. I've really pulled away from Twitter a lot other than just reading it to laugh at people. And again, that's why I think we've got to split, because a lot of the people that aren't psychotic have abandoned it. Lucas Paradox says, I agree with what I believe Mike Tyson once said. I would read it in Mike Tyson's voice, but I just can't do that lisp that good. I'll try. Social media has made you all way too comfortable with disrespecting people and not getting punched in the face for it. And I'm not making fun of Mike. I'm just trying poor, because I'm a big Mike Tyson fan, actually. I'm just trying to do my really poor impression of him. I agree with that. I think that, and I'll read it properly. Social media has made you all way too comfortable with disrespecting people and not getting punched in the face for it. I think that is absolutely true. I think that's why you see so many people on there that have their burner accounts and things of that nature, because they're afraid to say what they've typed in real life. They would never express it because they're cowardly in that regard. Now, that's not to say that everybody that has an anonymous account is a coward. I'm talking about people who have anonymous accounts with the express design to go out and be combative. That's what I'm leaning towards. I apologize for the dog sounds in the background. I'm not sure what's going on outside my window here. Let's see. Lix says, I don't know what happened. Lixbox says, I don't know what happened. It started with just the Tumblr immigration, and now it's gotten out of control. Yeah, I think a lot of that, Lix, is just what we were talking about. I think the people who had more normal sensibilities have abandoned it. So it's just left it to be more of a playground of the psychotics. That Maximilian Musk says so many popular people quit Twitter because it's just getting that bad because they can't live with it anymore. That's true. The stands are generally the most famous because they leak addresses of people disagreeing. Yeah, and that I would agree with you. And that's the large part of the toxicity of Twitter. And you, those of you listening at home, until we change location with this podcast, you will be regaled by horn whistles, train whistles, very, very commonly. I didn't realize that I live in a small town in upstate New York, but it's apparently the center of rail travel of the universe, just outside my window. And now one of our crew here, Spaz Giel, says, imagine doing that voice in front of Mike. No, I do imagine it, and then I imagine myself recuperating. But with the number of concussions I've had already, it's just like throw it on the pile at this point. And now OFESP says, Twitter is easily the worst. People who would otherwise be shunned by most can group up with other morons to feel smarter. It's a lot of uneducated and ignorant crap. I also believe that is a very accurate statement. Yeah. And what's funny is sometimes the people who are most, well, can you say verbose? It's the written word. I'm going to say it anyway. Verbose about their intelligence quickly reveal themselves to be utter morons. Because what they don't are so simple that they can't understand is something being their opinion, when it is clearly an opinion, is what they base their claims of intelligence on. And that's never going to lead you down a path where anybody actually thinks you're smart. And I think that goes back to a lot of the people I said, Twitter users with a huge following who gain that following by using Twitter. That's typically them. They've found enough lemmings out there in the Twitter sphere that they'll just believe everything that they type and will hang on every word that they type because they all have a very tiny but like mind. But I will stand by that forever, and I would say that to any of them to their face. Anybody who's gone that route, built a Twitter following by being a Twitter user, or built a Twitter following by just trying to be a contrarian to somebody popular, is a doofus. Pizza Man says, oh, Pizza Man, now that's a screen name I can get behind. Twitter thrives on toxicity and echo chambers, agreed. Used to love Angry Joe, but he's become so political on Twitter. He's isolated and demonizes fans. Really? I know Angry Joe, for those of you who don't know, is a YouTuber. I haven't watched Angry Joe videos in some time, but I didn't know that. I didn't know he'd gone hyper-political on Twitter. That's interesting, Pizza Man. I did not know that. That's unfortunate. Me, I'm on YouTube. I like to talk politics as well. I think you'll find, and I think the people that have been with me for some time here on the live streams already know, I fully admit right now to being right-leaning. That's because I am somebody who doesn't like the extremes of either party. I don't like extremism. I don't think it ends well for anybody. And I think the left has been definitely gravitating more towards their extremists than has the right. Although the right's trying to catch up with these hardcore Trumpists trying to drag them all the way to the right. But I think you'll find that the reason I'm an independent is because I have too many beliefs that jump back and forth between the sides. And being truly in the middle now is, which is for me is a great thing. It's kind of a lonely island. Nobody wants anything to do with you, because we all know on both sides, if you're not willing to toe the line and, keep your belief structure without question to the authorities, the Twitter gods, then you're not accepted. Member Barry says, if you look at social media from the politics point of view, the worst is Twitter. Agreed. People who voice their opinions freely within their rights, both Dems and Republicans, are silenced by big tech if what's said isn't cool. Yeah, that's another conversation to have too now, is as we're seeing accounts removed for violation of the TOS. And I will say this, I don't see any real uniformity in how this is done. Because anybody who's been removed, and there have been from, at least from what I can see, it certainly seems like there have been more people that are on the conservative side removed. I have seen some on the left removed as well. But for every one of them that's been removed, the stated reasons are things that go on Twitter all the time on accounts that aren't punished. So yeah, there is definitely, and yes, you can make the case that it's a private company. They can get rid of whoever they want. But we are getting into the realm of where these social media platforms have become the penultimate way that information is exchanged, and should they have more responsibility because of that? Spezgiel says, has it been more toxic since they banned Trump? From my experiences, I don't think it could get any more toxic. I think it's as toxic. I don't think the toxicity has let up at all. You can see a lot of the Orange Man Bad Twitter, the ones, again, who created a following based on Orange Man Bad, panicking to keep his name fresh. Anything that they can in any way invoke the Trump name into that topic, they will do it. And it's again to keep their brand going. And we know that people have created these large Twitter followings, social media followings, and then have gone into the business of getting paid by individuals to tweet to try and keep a certain narrative out there. So that's to me that makes them akin to the robo or the scam callers you get on your phone, whether it's texts or phone calls. The people just trying to scam you. That it puts them in that exact same category. They're just not desirable people. Chrome, now speaking about this Angry Joe who we had just talked about, says, "Oh, Angry Joe is awful now. He looks like he ate Angry Joe chin-wise. Any minor criticism of him makes him screech, even when he's shown to be wrong. He's a disgusting idiot who hates his fans now." That's unfortunate. I had no idea. It might be a fun playground for me to go over and look at, though. I didn't know that with Angry Joe. Prasanna says, Prasanna Kamokanan. I might have gotten close to that name, maybe. Twitter is just pure empty noise at this point. When everyone is trying to say something, no one ends up saying anything. Again, that's fair. I mean, Twitter has just gotten to be such an abysmal wasteland. And it's too bad. I mean, it is the users that turned it that way. Initially, before it became so hyper-political, I think it was cool. You know, it's fun to be able to follow your favorite athlete, your favorite actor, and enjoy the things they say as a fan. You know, here it's going. It's great for. I'm a big sports fan. It's fun to follow an athlete and then get a little insight from them as to the happenings of their game, their match, whatever the case may be. But all of that has just gotten overwhelmed. Even now, again, as I said, if said athlete comes out and gives you some cool insight into what he or she was thinking within the playing of the game, immediately there will be a significant number of the dirtbag hangers-oners who just flock to any post that they know is going to be popular and completely interject their own needs into it. You know, completely unrelated, but they have to get their agenda in there to try and drum up more followers. So, in other words, it's like, yeah, when the pitcher says, going into the ninth, I was on fumes, but I thought I could get the last 3 outs. Somebody's going to come in there and say, yeah, well, I'll tell you what, if it weren't for the fact that Trump ran this country in the ground for 4 years, you wouldn't have been out of gas. I mean, that would be there. Wolverine says, to be fair, any social media has the right to ban anyone who violates their terms of service, but the government can't order it because it would violate the First Amendment. We just covered that, Wolverine. That's what I'm saying. So are we at a point, do we get to a point where because they are the penultimate means of exchanging information, Twitter, Facebook, so on and so forth, do they have a responsibility to create an even playing field for everyone? And if not, because they have this large, this insanely large impact on society, should they have to at least claim where their political interests lie? So you know that, okay, if you go on Twitter, you are going into a place that favors liberal ideas. If you're going into, gosh, the name's gone on my mind. What is the name of the social media platform the conservatives started and just got resurrected? It's gone from me for the moment. But I don't think anybody would need you there to actually proclaim it's for the conservative viewpoint. We know that, but should they have to do that? Code Purple Pilled says, but if you ban Twitter, those idiots will find another fairly decent social media and start to ruin it. Even though I don't like Twitter, we need a place to contain a bunch of it. So what you're saying, Code, is better to seeing that idiots are always going to be out there in significant numbers. Better to just have them all in one corral where we we can keep an eye on them. There might be something to be said for that. That may be true. Jack Queen says, a lot of literature discusses human beings reaching a level where we either have to be overbearingly controlling of free speech and movement and chaos with nothing in between, starting to see why. Yeah, as I've told our our gang here at the channel, at our live streams on many occasions, there's not all that much that would motivate me into the streets. But one thing that would do it is infringing on our abilities of on our free speech. In other words, I don't want hate speech policed, because hate speech isn't illegal. It's just hate speech. Because as soon as you say, okay, hate speech will now carry XYZ penalty, the immediate question becomes, who determines what is hate speech? And that's a slippery slope that guaranteed will go badly, because everyone with their own special interest is going to want to designate what constitutes hate speech. It would be an effective way of silencing dissidents to your specific methodology. Big Green says maybe we should revive Tumblr instead. That's where the idiots used to live. Somebody had alluded to that earlier, Big Green, that it was, Twitter initially took off because of the big Tumblr migration. True. And Member Berries, thank you, says the app you're thinking of, Curtis, that the Republicans founded, had killed, and got resurrected as Parler. Right, the Parler app. So, see, I believe personally that when any social media company gets that big, and then you would have to go through and apply this to every social media company, you couldn't pick and choose. I think if you're going to say, as a company, if you are going to say we are allowing people to express themselves on our platform, then everyone must be allowed to express themselves on that platform. And since they want to have terms of service, which is understandable, and they want to be able to get rid of certain things that they deem toxic, if someone is removed, and then that person who is removed sees someone doing the same things that they had done, taking the same perspectives, using the same, whatever it was that got them banned, taking those same actions, and they file a complaint about it with, say, Twitter, and that person is not removed, then Twitter should be liable when sued. I think they should lose that lawsuit. The reason I say that is because that would make Twitter and any social media company very, very careful about who they deplatform. It would have to be egregious, which is what I believe. If you're going to provide social media platforms, it should have to be egregious before you ban anybody from your platform. Because it's better to know, even if somebody does have ideas, thoughts that might be really obnoxious to the masses, then let them be out there and express that. Let them out themselves. That's perfect. Spagio says, why do more musicians, athletes, politicians, and celebrities prefer to use Twitter over other platforms? I think just right now, Spagio, size of audience, size of potential audience. I don't think it's anything more than that, and that's understandable. In those fields that you outlined, I don't think there is a social media platform that you could turn to where you could get a bigger following. And for politicians, absolutely, because again, just what we had talked about earlier, if you're a politician, if you can hook yourself up with the specific echo chamber groups at Twitter, you're going to have it won't be a loud voice much outside of people who already agree with you, but politicians need that. So that's why, because that type of toxicity works well for politicians, to be honest with you. Chrome says, exactly, I agree with this. Force them to either become a publisher or a platform. They live in a gray area right now. They shouldn't be able to. Also, having most of the world shut for a year shows why we need to deal with them. I agree. I think there's a huge responsibility that comes with operating a major social media platform, and I believe that they should have to take the responsibilities as such. Now, Lude says, Twitter's influx of Tumblr and Reddit people plus being the central platform at the moment, on which you have a very limited number of characters to say something with context, creates a perfect recipe for toxicity. I think it does, Lud, and I think it's of course, you're always going to have toxicity across social media. I mean, we see a lot of toxicity here at YouTube as well. Not, I don't think to the same degree as at Twitter, but you see a lot of toxicity any place that people can set up burner accounts. And again, I say that because I like to distinguish, because I know it hurts a lot of people's feelings. They're saying like, listen, I got every good reason to be anonymous on social media. I'm not debating, or I'm not demeaning that. I agree with that. I don't do it personally, but there's 1,001 different reasons why it's better to stay anonymous on the internet. What I'm talking about is people who create identities, anonymous identities, with the sole purpose of being out there to stir the shit or being out there to call out others. And to me, that's the ultimate in cowardice, because if you need to create a burner account to do this stuff, it's because you're afraid to say it to someone in real time, in real life, and that's just cowardly. Sean Callahan says, I drove to Detroit last week. The Detroit freeways flooded again. Yikes. And I used Twitter to see what freeways were blocked. Now, Sean makes a good point too. And that's where Twitter is a good thing. And I've done the same thing. I'm sure we all have. Whereas something major will be happening in the world, whether it's, like he says, roads in Detroit or on a larger global scale, Twitter is a great place to go because it does have such a huge reach that you can find out more details there quicker than you can by tuning into any of the news stations or anything like that. And especially now, and we will be doing separate podcasts regarding the mainstream media and what they've allowed themselves to become. It's so difficult now to even trust in media that at least with Twitter you can go out and whatever's going on, somebody's there with a camera, and Twitter will likely have the information that you want. But it is, I think, I'm not so much for shutting Twitter down. I am more for, as Chrome said, giving Twitter a specific designation and saying that if you're going to say that you're a level playing field, everybody here can come in, use our service, and express themselves, that's fine. But you have to 100% apply those terms of service fairly, because right now they simply don't. Another one, not nearly as toxic, but is really, really bad about selective enforcement of terms of service, would also be Twitch. And for those of you listening to the podcast, I think our group here all knows Twitch. Doesn't know what Twitch is, it's just a streaming service. It's mostly gaming, although the just chatting section of the streams has become very popular there. But they're another one of the social media companies that depends on who you are, how closely you have to, or how specifically you have to toe the lines. Mistra says, actually, Reddit and Twitch about even. A lot of crossover. I'm not as familiar with Reddit, so I can't say what... I mean, I've been on there. I think, though, with Reddit, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I think Reddit is known specifically for its toxicity. Not across all of Reddit, of course. I'm saying that we've known for some time that there is a very toxic, very obnoxious portion of Reddit. There are subreddits that are there just to be kind of hateful. So I don't think it's as surprising there, maybe. I think Twitter being more mainstream makes it seem even more toxic, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I don't disagree with you. Reddit's bad as well. And what we're talking about with these social media platforms and the rules by which the rules that should apply would apply to Reddit as well. Wolverine says social media sites need to be reworked heavily. For example, if you have been convicted of child abuse or endangerment, you should be banned. I don't know, because now the only problem you get into there, Wolverine, is you're talking about You're talking about adding a criminal penalty. So social media as a criminal penalty. So in other words, if you go through the court system, you've been convicted of child abuse or endangerment, part of your sentence is that you can't use social media. I don't know. I don't know constitutionally if you could even do that. You guys know how I feel about any type of child endangerment or pedophilia or anything like that. I mean, it is the number one most disgusting thing in the world to me. But that said, I don't know that you could, I don't know if you could add use of social media to somebody's basic sentence. Lude says the anonymity is a problem, just not the main one. Anonymity disconnects people from what they say somewhat. Sure, when you're posting as an anon, you don't feel a need to change your opinion, but just argue. I agree with that, Lude. I think that's true. And again, I as you said, I think psychologically that's definitely the case. But again, I do understand why people want to be anonymous online. It's not hard to figure out, especially with what we're talking about, with the other people that you're interacting with on these social media sites. It's completely understandable why people want to be anonymous. My only issue, again, is with people who create accounts strictly to say the things that they would be afraid to say in real life. And I just think that makes you cowardly. Chrome says Twitter is just a bizarre place of partisans, true, who can't argue on a basic framework or of good and evil. We had some idiot dressed like a rainbow monkey with a dick around kids somehow became partisan. Well, and absolutely, I agree. As soon as kids are involved, you know where I'm going to land on the issue. But we've got this hyper partisanship as part of our society now. And as I've said, and this will be a conversation for another day in and of itself, that's why I think we so desperately need, and we're going the opposite way, we so desperately need to turn more and more policy and decision-making back to states and local municipalities and get more and more of them, as the ones that are possible, away from the federal government so people can live how they want to live. I mean, we see it with a lot of things like policing. There are certain areas of the country right now where it seems significant portions of populations are basically anti-police. They want them, any one of a number of things. They certainly want the police departments completely revamped. Some of them want them disbanded. And then you have other areas of the country where the large part of the people are big supporters of the officers who police them. And that's why allowing people to make their rules, laws, regulations on a local level is important. If people have issues with their police department, the preponderance of the community wants less of them out there. If the preponderance of the community wants psychologists responding to certain crimes, let them do it. You're going to have a lot of areas I would be considered in this latter set where people want the police out there, where people understand that, as do I, because I've met some of them, that like in any other profession, there are bad cops. But overall, I support the police and I want the bad cops taken out of the job. I don't want them to be out there. But that doesn't mean that I want a lesser police force. And that doesn't mean that I think it's a good idea to put people with psychology degrees in harm's way because somebody may or may not be violent in their psychotic episode that they're having. Wolverine says if you're allowed social media once you're out, you might be able to contact future victims or people you have targeted in the past. That's my angle. I didn't misunderstand your angle. My concern is I don't even know if that's constitutional. You would have to go to someone with a much higher pay grade than me, but that would be very unique to say that, okay, part of your sentence is you can't be on this social media account unless, the only way I could see it getting over is if the person convicted had been presented in court as evidence, and part of their conviction was that they'd utilized social media as a means for committing their crime, I could see it then. I think you'd get by with it then. But to say anybody who's, as you mentioned, convicted of some sort of child endangerment can no longer use social media, I bet you constitutionally you wouldn't be able to do that. Spazio says, if you think about it, Reddit's the most toxic. That's where the whole incel and red pill type ideologies come from, right? Oh, again, Spazio, my personal opinion, this is just strictly my take on it. I've always, well, of course, I'm on the internet a lot. I think more deeply with having the YouTube channel and the Patreon and everything. Certainly, I think more so than the common person my age is, being almost 60. But for me, Reddit was like, it's always been known that Reddit has those subreddits that are there just for toxicity and just to stir the shit. So I don't think it's surprising at all. I think with Twitter being so much bigger than Reddit, and Twitter having so many the highest profile people in the world are on Twitter, I think that's why that's the target for where we need to draw a line in the sand of what their Twitter's specific responsibilities are. So Laura says, I'm going to be honest. I think Twitter, Reddit, and other social media sites are apolitical. They have no values. I think the top people are just grifters who quickly change ideas if it was a negative for their career. I think the dollar rules overall. I think you're right on that. I don't think they're apolitical, though. I think, I think at the top, Twitter and Facebook, I think they have a definite political slant. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just might be something that if they allow that political slant to dictate how they do business, considering that they are the way that the world communicates now, I think that could be a problem. Chrome says, well, the Biden administration did just admit they're working with Facebook and such to ban people who spread misinfo. So the private company thing doesn't work then. That, yeah, I would agree with that. If you've got the Biden administration working with Facebook, because now you're saying, okay, well, that's a good thing. We don't want misinformation. But what you're opening the door for there is, again, for the Biden administration to help be the arbiters of what would be misinformation. Because I can tell you, I saw specifically a case of Facebook doing just this. Recently, somebody had posted something about Biden and the gas prices, and Biden being responsible. That was listed, it got flagged as misinformation. But I went through and read, you can click to get more information. The reasons that they said that was misinformation were entirely misleading. The gas prices are not directly and only connected to the Biden administration. Everything that they listed as the reasons for why it was misinformation was correct in that they gave other possible explanations. Because you can't say exactly precisely what it is, but they gave, the economy or the people starting to come out of hiding basically from the pandemic, everybody's back on the road, so on and so forth. However, Biden cutting off funding for that pipeline and a Democratic regime, which we tend to know is much more restrictive towards companies with, restrictive with restrictions, with the restrictions they place on companies as far as what they can and cannot do to get their oil, to mine their coal. Of course he had something to do with it. He's absolutely a part of it. Is he the only reason gas prices went up? No, absolutely not. Is he a part of the reason? Yes, absolutely, because of his political views. But when that got flagged as being misinformation, it did not allow for the fact at all that Biden's administration being put in place could have something to do with it. And that's why it's bullshit. It's not a fact checker. A fact checker, just like the old days of journalism when journalists had a little integrity, you look, even if you didn't agree with it, you look at all sides of the issue. And you would represent all sides of the issue. That's gone by the wayside. Willie Plays says, as someone who uses Reddit daily for memes and other things, I can confirm that Reddit can be super toxic, but Reddit has plenty of nice communities. Yeah, and you know what it is too, Willie? I think with Reddit being, and a lot of people I know out there are not Reddit users, Twitcher. That's Twitter and Twitch combined, if you want to use both at the same time. Twitter is much more high profile, and Reddit has what they call subreddits. So at least in Reddit, you can go and look for specifics. You know, whatever the case may be, whether it's political, movies, entertainment, pop culture, personal viewpoints. You can go on Reddit and supposedly go to an area that will talk about just what you want, whereas Twitter is a wide open playground. It's just a free-for-all. So I think that too, that's why they get more heat for the toxicity, because a good portion of Reddit that's toxic is toxic by name. If you go into certain subreddits, you got to figure they're going to be pretty toxic just by the way they're titled. Code Purple Pilled says the major problem is that the majority of fact checkers in the social medias are leaning towards left, and if your opinion is different, then they will be labeled as misinformation or hate speech. Well, that's why I don't like the idea of any political entity having any input into determining what is anybody's misinformation, because again, I saw that for myself on Facebook, and once again, it wasn't outright lies; it was just telling half truths. You only outline the ways that the rise in gas prices could not be a specific result of Biden or a Democrat regime in the White House. You didn't even mention the just as viable alternatives where they could have something to do with it. So that's when now for me, when I see that, it's like, okay, if I know that this is how Facebook does quote unquote fact checking, they don't really do actual fact checking. I'm not inclined to pay any attention to anything they fact check. Because if you're willing to tell a half-truth once, obviously you're willing to tell a half-truth as many times as it takes. Let's see. You're a God says, who pays this racist to stay on YouTube? You do. By being here and being a part of everything, you do. This person here is he's kind of a small little guy who sees himself as something really spectacular, next level, and he's just, you know, he's perfect example of one of those life's losers we were talking about. He's a cute little guy though. He's good for a couple laughs here or there. Leslie says, do you know the app Amino? No, I'm not familiar with that, Leslie. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that is. The Gimster says, so I just got here, and what I hear is always extremely lean one direction of politics, and Twitter is best place on the internet. Understood. Well, Gimster, in today's society, you don't really have any choice if you want to be accepted than to lean one way in politics, one way or the other. But whichever way you lean, that side wants you on their side 100% of the time, all the way down the line, or you're a traitor. All right, guys, I enjoyed talking about that. We got a couple more topics I want to cover, and I want to jump over to it. I want to know how many of you guys heard about this, and I couldn't find a good place. I heard the name pronounced different ways, so I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right, and I apologize. The pronunciation is wrong. This young girl, Zyla, I believe it's Zyla Avant-Garde. She's a 14-year-old who just won the Scripps Spelling Bee, and she is the first African-American person to win it. And that's a major accomplishment in and of itself. And it really struck me for a number of reasons. Well, one was I thought she was cute that she's getting all these accolades. I mean, that's a big freaking deal. You win the Scripps Spelling Bee, you're a badass. You're an intellectual icon. And she's like, and I'm paraphrasing, yeah, winning that was okay and everything, but let's go play some basketball. She's a basketball freak, fanatic for basketball. And I just thought it was cool because typically we always see, you know, the common perception is anybody who's going to win something in a cerebral field such as that tends to lead towards the nerd side. But this girl, I guess she's not only into basketball, but from what I've read, she's really, really good. And I just thought it was cool. It was fun. It was a great story. And I think it's awesome that with her being the first African American to win that contest, it's great to see somebody getting accolades for being a first at something. And that's a big deal. That's a big first. And getting accolades for being a first at something because they were able to accomplish it. Because they went out and they kicked some ass and they took a prize, rather than what seems to be more of the way we do things now is we laud and congratulate people for being the first to do something when basically all they did was show up type thing. And I know you guys know what I'm talking about. It's one thing to go out and win something and achieve something. It's another to have something handed to you and then be lauded for it because you fit into a certain demographic. So I thought it was really cool. And I just loved her attitude. Just loved it. It was like, yeah, I'm good at spelling, but hey, check out my crossover. So I like that. And Willie Place says, politics makes me sad. Let's talk anime ditties. Well, we will do that sometime on another stream, not one for the not one for the podcast. Sounds cute. It was Chrome. She was very cute. She was a cute little kid, and she kicked ass. Oh shoot, I didn't write it down. What the? I wanted to see if I would have. Shut up, train. I wanted to see if I would have spelled the word that won it for her correctly, but unfortunately, I saw it written before I heard it said, so I can't tell because I would have been guessing. I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you and say, yeah, I knew that word. I didn't know it. But it wasn't far off from how you would think it might be spelled. So I really don't know if I would have gotten it right or not, because by seeing it before I heard it, it took away any opportunity for me to. The problem is the however many words she had to spell before that, there would have been a bunch of them that tripped me up, so it didn't really matter anyway. It's just like watching Jeopardy, and you get blanked in Jeopardy and Double Jeopardy. But you knew the final Jeopardy answer, so you proclaim yourself to be king. I've done that. Oh, really? And Member Berry says she's also good at gymnastics and juggling. Really? I didn't see that. That's amazing. I just think it's awesome. She's a great kid. Really accomplished something big, and I just like putting her word out there, putting her name out there as much as possible. And again, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Zyla, I believe it is. It's Zaila, avant-garde. Pretty badass little kid. Talk about, man, I would like to be as good at one thing, any one thing, as she is at a bunch of things. That's humbling. Because I can't juggle either. Mariah, thank you, Chrome. Yeah, I don't know. Because I saw it written first. And as you can see, it's spelled like it sounds. Would I have put the second R in there? I don't know. It's impossible to say because I saw it first. I mean, if you sound it out, you would think you'd put the second R because if you take it by syllable, it's mer. Rye, so you would think you would have two R's in there, but I can't say for sure. I don't know if I would have gotten it right or not. Yeah, Nacho Dragon says kid sounds like an all-star. Absolutely. Oh, kid with a big, big future. Just come on, just being able to. Now it's one thing to be that good at spelling, but again, she's 14, and these are all kids. To also have and this goes to all the kids who compete in that, the intestinal fortitude to get out there and withstand that pressure and still come through tells you she's going to do big, big things. Jack Queen, I agree. It's like giving kids in school a sticker for good attendance, right? Rather than good work that goes above and beyond. Yeah, I agree. And what Jack's referring to, if you just came in, we're not taking anything away from Zyla. It's quite the opposite. What we're saying is it's fun to celebrate somebody who went out and kicked some ass and won something, not somebody who had something given to them and then wants to be celebrated because they fit into a certain category. And we see a lot of that now. We see a lot of that on some significantly high levels. And this girl is just like, Watch me. And then again, it's just so perfect that when you win, you're like, yeah, that was cool, but that's not even what I'm best at. she'll be playing WNBA someday, playing for us in the Olympics and everything. You can just see it coming. Jeez. Now wait a second. Chrome's got a couple of words she had to spell prior. I guarantee you I'm going to butcher the pronunciations. Querimonious? Querimonious? Nope, would have missed that one. And solidungulate. Solidungulate? Solidungulate. They would have given me those words. I would have just laughed and walked out the stage. I would have said, solidungulate. Nope. Solidungulate. Yeah, because it wasn't going to happen. Wow. Jeez. All right. Okay, guys, we got one more topic we wanted to cover. If you win because of pity, it's just charity. I agree, Spezio. And again, it's not even winning if somebody gave you something and then you want to be congratulated because you fit into a certain category or demographic and you were given that something. Thanks, Curtis. Now my chairs are floating, Willie says. Okay, last thing I want to talk about, the voter suppression laws. And to me, this is another one that is, I think, and maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, kind of a no-brainer. But there was a major conversation in the comment section of one of our earlier streams about voter suppression laws. And to me, okay, excuse me, guys. Let's talk about what is and isn't suppression. First of all, I don't think having to produce an ID is suppression. You have to, how many things in life do you have to produce an ID for? If you, I'm going to say, if you don't have, you're an adult and you don't have an ID, what are the odds you're going to vote anyway? Because you've been completely removing yourself from society. You know, you don't have a driver's license. That's not a big deal. A lot of people in metropolitan areas don't have driver's licenses. But, you know, you have to have it to apply for any number of government benefits or anything government related in any way. You have to have ID if you want to have a bank account. You have to have ID if you want to buy some alcohol. It's just having an ID is a good idea as far as requirements for voting. Not having enough polling places or intentionally taking polling places down to make certain people have to travel further, that is suppression. No question about it. We should be working as hard as we can to make sure that actual polling places are available for everybody. That's another no-brainer. Sending out ballots without being requested, just sending out mass mailings of ballots is stupid. That's just making the system ripe for misuse. No question about it, that's dumb. Other side of the coin, allowing people to request mail-in ballots should also be a no-brainer. It's pretty simple. Of course, you should be allowed to vote by mail. There still needs to be a means of allowing you to prove who you are, but you should be allowed to vote by mail. And if you can get, when you apply to, well, actually, I shouldn't even say that, because when you vote by mail, they've got your name and address. It's easy enough to cross-reference. So at least somewhere someone can go in and say, okay, this person at this address has already voted, and we can take you off the voting rolls on election day because your vote's already in. But both sides, once again, you have, and we know exactly why this all takes place. Let's not fool ourselves. The left knows that they have a significant number of people who will likely vote their way that may not be super motivated. And so they want to not only make it easy for them, but they want to make it easy for them to influence them and say, here, well, we're sending you this. Now here, we're going to make a video and we're going to shout into the streets and tell you how to fill that out and where to send it. And then you have people on the right who know that there are certain areas where the voting isn't going to go our way. So if we make it a little harder for them to get to a polling station, it comes out better for us. That's it. And this is all predicated on, and this is something that drives me nuts, this is all predicated on the thought that everybody should go out and vote. It's their civic duty. That's stupid. You try and make people feel bad for not voting. Listen, if somebody is not interested in politics for whatever reason, doesn't matter what their reasoning is, if they're not interested in politics and they don't bother to learn about the candidates, don't vote. Don't vote. It's as simple as that. If you're encouraging everybody to go out and vote regardless, despite the fact that you may know nothing about the candidates, then it must be you feel like you need low information voters to get yourself across the finish line. The logic would tend to follow there, then the people who would want low information voters the most are the ones that are most likely to be influenced by what they see in headlines. That's why I think you see a lot of that being attributed to the left, because we know that there is definitely a left political lean in a significant number of major news outlets. But why? I mean, I ask that sincerely. If you guys can explain it to me, I'm all ears. Why is it a good idea to try and coerce everybody into voting, even if they don't know anything about the issues or the politicians themselves? Oh, no. Now, Big Green says, I don't remember that, though. I think I told you about the time I was dragged along to vote, even though I knew nothing about the parties and its candidates or what they stood for. I was displeased. Exactly. I don't think it's anything that people should be demeaned for. Well, you can't complain about your government if you don't vote. Yes, you can. Well, of course you can. You're still a subject of that government. Now, you can make a case that, well, if you'd have voted, maybe you wouldn't have this complaint, and that's entirely true. But you can still see something as unfair just because you didn't vote for them. But why? Why would you want no information voters out there? I don't get that. Member Barry says, I didn't have my ID for the 2020 election, so I had to produce my voter registration card, birth certificate, and a copy of my W-2 as proof of identity. Seemed reasonable to me. That's just my opinion. That's reasonable, yeah. Yeah, like I say, I think before anybody votes, there should always have to be an ID presented. That keeps the system honest. It's simple. And I don't understand why a lot of people on the left have issue with that. But, well, yeah, I shouldn't say I don't understand. I don't think they should have issue with it. But then again, you do have people on the right who in some of these areas are actually removing polling places from the rolls, from the areas where people can go and vote. And that's just as much bullshit. Both parties should always want as many polling places out there as possible. You know, that filters down to the local level anyway. So it's not like it's a big onus that's taken on in the case of national elections every 4 years, or the big national election, presidential elections every 4 years, that really brings out a lot of voters. It's not like it's an extra onus on the federal government. That's facilitated at the local level. So I'm curious as to why anybody would think that it's a good idea to tell everybody, well, you have to vote. Get out there and vote. It's your civic duty. The hell it is. That's moronic. Emerald Octopus says, the only time I've ever heard anyone complain about mail-in ballots was this last election. Well, I think, and again, what my take on that, I believe that's because ballots were just mailed out, and I don't agree with that. I don't think you should ever mail out a ballot to anybody who hasn't requested it. I think you should always be able to request it. But the idea of just mailing them out there and knowing how many different ways that could go wrong, you don't know who actually opens that mail. And again, why are you trying to accommodate, because that's what you're doing, why are you trying to accommodate uninterested voters? Because we've always had, as long as you keep that absentee ballot process there, As long as anybody can request a ballot by mail, there's absolutely no need to just randomly mail out to everyone. Other than that, you got to have a political interest that feels if you make it overly simplified, you can get the no information voters, and the no information voters will go your way. That's the only reason I can think of why they would think that's a good idea. Chrome says, because for some reason people see voting as more of a necessity than actually doing research. Yeah, I just don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to try and encourage people who will tell you, I didn't pay any attention to it. Well, you still got to go out and vote. Why? Because what people, when they say that to people, when you have someone, if you're in conversation and you say to somebody, whether it's on a one-on-one scale or a scale of you talking to your entire following on a social media platform, if you say, you got to get out there and vote, and the response is, well, I don't really follow politics. I don't know the politicians. I wouldn't know who to vote for. That's where they want their opening to come in and say, oh, well, let me tell you. I'll tell you who you should vote for. That's why. That's why they say everybody needs to vote, because they're hoping to get that opportunity to not make you in any way, shape, or form more knowledgeable, because they're not going to tell you about both sides of any issue. They just want to be able to get more drones into their camp. Let's see. Gimster said, I'm part of the First Nations people of Canada, so he kept getting the beatings from both sides of the government. That's why I've never voted. And that's the thing. The thing is, Gimster, nobody should have to vote. Again, why? For whatever your reason may be, why would you have to vote? If you're not interested, you're not interested. So what? Really? Farhan Hatim says, I've literally heard people say mandatory voting must be made a law. Yikes. They give civic rights and patriotism as reasons. Like, wow. Yeah, that goes from the realm of, gee, I don't understand it, to absolute insanity. That's stupid. Making people go out and vote. That's ridiculous. Jeez. Chrome says, legally I can't drive because of my eyesight, so I don't have a driver's license. I still have a passport. Getting ID isn't hard. Just make sure it's up to date. You need it to buy a lot here. Well, that's what I mean, Chrome. Just the way everything has turned, worldwide. How could you survive without an ID of some sort? And the people, I still maintain this. Anybody who doesn't have a form of ID is not somebody who is going to be interested in voting anyway. I just don't believe it. If you're so disinterested in the system that you don't have a form of identification, I don't think you're really that concerned about getting down to the polling place and casting your ballot. Jack says, I completely agree you don't have to vote, but then complaining that people didn't vote for the right person when you couldn't be bothered. What's your opinion on that? Well, of course, there's a level of hypocrisy about this. Now, see, the reason I don't jump on people complaining when they didn't vote altogether is because you never know what might inspire somebody to vote. So say somebody didn't vote in the election in 2020, and now they don't like the Biden administration. And again, I'm not picking on Biden. I'm just saying because he's the one who won. Now you don't like him. So if you're out there complaining about, you think he's responsible for the gas prices, he's doing this wrong, he's doing that wrong, and somebody says, well, did you vote? And they say no, that might be what they need to become involved and start learning about politicians. So to say that they don't have the right to complain, I would disagree with. But to say that it makes if it hasn't woken them up to why they need to vote and they're just out there complaining, I would say it makes their complaint pretty much, I don't think anybody's going to take their complaint too seriously, put it that way. Excuse me. Willie says, the left wants little information voters. If those voters don't care to look into matters, then they'll see the utopian society the Dems are saying they want to create, then they'll vote for them. I think there's some truth to that, Willie. I think it's more so because, and the left would say this isn't true, but it's just a lie. It's absolutely the fact. The vast majority of mainstream media has a significant left lean. And so I think it would only make sense for the people on the left side to believe that, hey, the lower information voters are going to be out for us because these are people who only read the best way to put it is these are the people that only read the headlines. They're not getting down to the details. So you could make that case. I think that's true. Member Barry says, here in Philadelphia for the 2020 election, there was a bomb threat at a polling station in one of the most impoverished neighborhoods where people are low income. City panicked to find a new location. That's tough. Yeah, that's an entirely different monkey wrench thrown into the works right there. Yeah, I don't, boy, what do you do in that situation? Other than, like you say, just panic to find someplace else to get secured up to where they can vote. It probably depends on how big the place was that got the bomb threat too. I mean, you would think that when the authorities respond, if it's not a particularly large building, you would think the police could clear it of a bomb threat relatively quickly. But if it's a sizable building, a big school or something like that, yeah, oof, I don't know. Yeah, what do you do with that? That's a tough one. The Socialists Are Coming says, the classic thing is the left is the party of the poor and uber rich. Hence, they benefit by making more poor or more uber rich. The right is of the middle class and they benefit by making more middle. I think that was always considered classic. Socialists Are Coming. I think there's been movement within that in all directions. I think you're finding more poor people willing to look beyond and not, it's still going to be heavily Democrat, but I think there's a lot more people willing to look beyond. And certainly you were right. Middle class, upper middle class always tended to be much more Republican leaning. And I know there's a lot of them looking at the other side saying, so I think there's a lot of movement in there now. Spazio says, remember when we talked about vaccines here? I do. It was just a few days ago, as a matter of fact. Cold Purple Pill says, the left be like voters' ID is suppression. Anyway, we need you to have a vaccine passport ASAP. Yes. you make a good point there. And there again, that's why, as far as the extremists, that's why I always land in the middle. You guys know how I stand on the vaccines. I was all for them, got vaccinated as soon as I could. And that the vaccine hesitancy is not like anything else, not 100%, but it certainly is a heavily leaning extreme right position. And so, like I say, even though I lean to one side or the other, I have so many beliefs that go back and forth across. Willie Play says, also the problem I have with mail-in ballots is that I can absolutely see the Biden administration pulling a Susan, saying they sent out ballots to the Republicans, but they didn't. Well, I think anything, I will say this, Willie, I think any process within the voting process itself has to be monitored by both sides. That's another part of the suppression things. Should partisans be allowed to witness the voting, the booths and I don't have an issue with that as long as both sides are represented. I mean, we do need checks and balances. Both sides would absolutely, in a heartbeat, come on, we know what people are willing to do to try and get their particular candidate into office. It's anything at all they'll do to get them in. So yes, there has to be a system of checks somehow in anything related to the voting process. Spazio says, he's talking about vaccines. The comment section was like Reddit toxic when we talked about vaccines a few days ago. So I'm surprised there's only one dislike so far. Well, it's not even so much the dislikes. I think people have the battles within the conversation. I don't want to get too far into that because here on the podcast, we are going to be talking about the vaccines. We'll always be talking as long as it's still a thing because there's constantly new information. It's a constantly evolving situation with the COVID-19 virus and the vaccines. So we will be talking about that very soon in an upcoming podcast episode. Code Purple Pilled said, honestly, in my experience, getting an ID is way easier compared to getting a passport/visa. Yeah, I agree. Because with an ID, you can always just go down. You can get to any DMV, you can get an ID. I've always said this. As long as we can say comfortably, and if anybody wants to say this in the case, I'm willing to listen. But suppose the government said we're going to have another round of stimulus. But to get your stimulus money, you have to show up as you would for a day of voting by the commonplace standards, or the standards that have been in place, which means you either show up on the day that you dispersed your money at a ballot at a specific location, or you can mail in early and ask for your check to be sent to you. I'll bet you nobody would have a problem with it. I'll bet you everybody would make a concerted effort to make sure they did whatever they needed to do to get that stimulus check. As well they should. But all that points out is it's just a case of how motivated are people to do something. So when you say, well, no, not everybody can get an ID, I don't buy that bullshit. I think they can get an ID if they're so motivated to. If they don't get an ID to vote, it's because they weren't motivated enough to vote. There are avenues to take. There are outreach groups that will help you get it. There are political groups that will help you get your ID so you can vote. I just don't buy it. ID should absolutely be necessary, but then again, the other side is we should be looking to create as many polling places as possible, not eliminate. Chrome says, for example, you need ID to buy can openers or corkscrews in stores here. I didn't know that, but for some reason I can buy IPAs to make batter without an ID. Really, I didn't know that. Can openers and corkscrews? I wonder if that's too because, is that Chrome just because, again, for those who don't know, Chrome lives in Scotland. Over in the UK and surrounding regions, obviously there isn't the litany of guns that there are here in America. So I think more of your violent crimes are done with pointy objects, cutting, slicing objects. So I would assume that's a lot of the reason why. And Special is talking about Stream Boss. For those who don't know, he's talking about Stream Boss. It's just something we have during the streams. It's preset into my settings here where as people do certain interactions with the stream, you become a Stream Boss and it's displayed on the screen. Okay. Chrome says anything with technically a blade on it. So basic cutlery and other such. Yeah, I get that because I know for a fact that a much larger percentage of your violent crimes, because of the lack of guns, is committed with slicey, pointy objects. So I kind of get where they're coming from. Jack Queen says, I was raised to always vote with my World War II grandfather reminding me people died for free speech and it was a privilege. I understand that, but also sometimes cartoons are on. That's actually well put. And I don't disagree with your grandpa at all. It is a privilege. But that's just what it should be, is a privilege. Just because we have a privilege to do something doesn't mean we want to take part in it. And again, if we don't have an interest in that specific privilege, we shouldn't really be expected to. Socialists are coming says, yeah, most anti-voter ID arguments are really racist when you actually look at them. They can't get IDs, they can't drive, they can't. Real life is stranger than fiction. Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that when they talk about who is this they that can't. Because I'm fortunate enough in my life, I have a lot of personal friends and acquaintances of, every race, religion, everything. I've got a wide mix. A lot of people that live in very depressed areas. My area is very economically depressed. A lot of people that live in quite affluent areas. And in that, I don't know anybody that has a problem getting an ID. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I think if you have a problem getting an ID, it's because you haven't put any effort into it. Let's see. Curtis, in Japan, most murder are made by killing someone with a box cutter, Father Anderson says. Yeah, that's what I've heard. And again, without the prevalence of guns, there's still going to be crazies. And gun control is another issue we'll be tackling here in the podcast, so we won't get too deep into that. But yeah, that made I didn't know that until Chrome brought it up about needing an ID to buy pointy objects, but kind of makes sense. Gimster says, not enough money to buy an ID? Mug someone to fund it and then super chat to Mr. Curtis. Why do I hear pigs getting closer? Yeah, those are the things, Gimster, you're supposed to think but not actually type, right? All right, well, guys, I think this is just about, we're going to wrap up for the, oh, hold on. Spagio says, wait, so Asian people actually can't drive? We're going to wrap up the podcast. I want to thank everybody for listening. After the podcast, we'll have a little bit more chat here. We have a little bit of an after party type thing here in the chat. Once again, the podcast is right now, it's available at Buzzsprout. Just search Curtis Candy Podcast. When we get several episodes under our belt, I'll start spreading it out to all the, to iTunes, every place that carries podcasts, I'll make it available. But for now, if you want to come join in on the recordings, just come to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/spaz, S-P-A-Z, Boys Comedy. And we will eventually, if the podcast does well, be moving it to its own entity. We'll be using a service called Crowdcast for the streams. But for now, this is the most convenient way to go about it. If you join us here at the YouTube channel, you can not only engage in these recordings of the podcast with us, but I'm able to reach out to you in the community tab and let you know when there's going to be any future recordings and when we get a set schedule set up for them. But thank you very much for listening. I appreciate everybody stopping by that could. I certainly appreciate all you guys in here with me in the live stream itself and contributing. This is a lot of fun. We got a lot more stuff coming up. There's not a topic that I consider taboo. We'll cover everything. So if you enjoy it, come along. And again, we're at Buzzsprout right now. We'll be branching out to every place you can imagine where they'll have somebody like me very soon. Thanks for listening. Okay, guys, we are off to after party time here. Let's see. We're discussing the box cutters. I didn't know that until Chrome said that, but thinking about it, that makes sense. I would have never thought of that on my own, but if the majority of your violent crimes are committed with sharp, pointy objects, you're going to make sure that only adults, at least, are getting those sharp, pointy objects. I get that. Kaiser says you apparently need an ID to buy a marker in some states, I heard. Yeah, but Kaiser, I think that's just because of people huffing it, isn't it? That goes back to even the days when I was younger. I know in their quest to get a buzz, I know kids used to take and just sniff the markers to get high. I think that's why that was the case. Wasn't it, guys? If I'm not mistaken. Big Green says, okay, podcast over. Proceed to talk about the anime titties. Indeed. Well, I will try, guys. I'm going to try and set it up to where we have a regular schedule, at least once a week, regular schedule of when we do the podcast recordings. And that way you guys will always know when we can come in and talk about the topical stuff and everything. Willie Play says, yay, after party, I'll grab some Nigerians. Farhan says, probably my most favorite line from all of Meat Canyon Universe. This little rabbit's hopping down the old bunny trail. If you know, you know. Shark Dentures says, I remember that. And sniffing glue was a thing too, a big thing. Yeah, Dentures. But that's why you have to have ID. Typically, when you have to have ID to purchase something that you otherwise wouldn't think you need ID to purchase it, it's because somebody did something really fucking stupid at one point. That's pretty much a general rule of thumb. Special says, yay, family time now, indeed. Nacho says, Nigerians and boobs are always a good time. Well, that must mean Nigerian boobs are just like next level good time. Bouncing off the wall good time. Excuse me. Kaiser says, where'd you get the new background curse? Oh, these are just hangings. It just for the podcast and things like that. I'd rather than have all the anime stuff and everything in the background. I prefer to just have the just a different look. I've got about 3. I should get some more of these, but I got about 3 of these hangings that I can put up back there. I did hear about the new Meat Canyon video. We'll be reacting to that one pretty soon, Code. Who says, "Oh shit, that's an actual hanging"? Yeah. I'll put up some of the others on some of the other streams. Rover says, "I've just got here and we're talking about Nigerian boobs. I see this community as good as ever." Absolutely. We know what's what. We know where the real meat of the conversations are. Moving away from the green screen. Not entirely moving away, Philip. Just covering up for the moment. It just looks much better. When it's for the podcast, it just has a much cleaner look to not have that. Especially when you try and green screen yourself and you got this giant freak bald head. It's almost impossible not to get green hue all of it because no hair or anything to take away the sheen. Wolverine says abortions bring the kid out of you. Barry says, real story. I'm in line at the FEMA center to get my vaccine. This lady with a megaphone is yelling, "It's like you're in line for the gas chambers at Auschwitz." I replied, "Wait, this isn't Auschwitz? Are you serious? What the fuck is wrong with people?" I mean, do you know how demeaning that is to compare anything, let alone getting a vaccine, to the Holocaust? I mean, this is just what we're talking about. We're talking about Twitter. Holy crap. People are psychotic. Jeez. It's indeed, Shark Dentures. Nigerian boobs equals highly intellectual stream. Lute says, I was so convinced that was a green screen. Mark Bark had infected me too. Everyone run before I sneeze on you. Yeah. The green screens are cool because you got your choice of backgrounds, but again, it's just this great big, very light white bald head makes lighting a green screen a nightmare. Oh, good. Lute says, speaking of the vax, arm is no longer sore. My first dose seems to have gone through fine. Oh, good. I said I didn't have any problems with 1. And even with 2, again, 5-6 hours, I felt kind of crappy. Just like everybody describes, kind of like flu symptoms. But after 5-6 hours, you still felt a little bit of lag, but nothing significant. Didn't stop you from doing anything. It didn't even really affect my day that much. I think the second day after I probably laid down in the midst of it when the symptoms were the worst. I laid on my bed for like 15, 20 minutes, just closed my eyes, got back up. It wasn't too bad. Yeah, I know, Jack. Your background is all fake. Drunk says, what's your favorite movie quote? Mine's if he dies, he dies. Oh, yeah, good. Good old Ivan Drago. I don't know if I have an individual favorite quote. There's so many. What else floats? Very small rocks. I just want to watch the goddamn World Series. Dad, want to have a catch? There's a bunch of them. Oh, you did, Philip? Philip got his second shot yesterday. Wasn't that bad? Oh, good. You didn't get too much of a reaction? Good. Well, here's hoping that, we can get past this Delta variant. Numbers start to drop. And with the number of people vaccinated and the number of people that will have antibodies from having been infected, hopefully we can get to... I was reading one epidemiologist the other day, and very knowledgeable guy, and not one of these people that claim to know everything. He was saying you can't know everything about this virus, but from what he's researched, what he's seen, as opposed to other coronaviruses and stuff, he thinks this one very well may end up with, it's kind of a seasonal cold type thing. And that's not to say it could be eradicated altogether. But he said, you have to remember, he said the flu was more severe until we started getting the flu every year. And even though there are different strains of the flu, it's still the same basic concept. So we've built immunities to it. And he thinks that it's possible this could happen. Whereas, again, every so often you may get a touch of the of the COVID, but it'll be more like a cold or something. The best possible scenario is like has happened with some other coronaviruses. Once you get them to zero spread, they just die out. That's what we obviously will root for. Let's see. Father Anderson says, Curtis, the best kind of boobs to me is cosplayers and goth boobs, maybe emo. I tell you, I've always liked that emo look. I mean, not just in general, but I mean, there's a lot of really hot emo chicks out there. That whole darkness thing and everything, it can be really attractive. That's a good one too, Code. Oh, hi, Mark, is objectively the greatest movie line ever. Chrome says, of course the background is not fake. It's just Curtis has always been Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame. The other scenes have been green screened by Mark. I'm not. Shark Dentures says, I'm not interested in taking an untested experimental new vaccine. Then I hear crazy examples like above and say, wait, this is the side I'm on. Ugh. I go through similar things all the time, Shark, on the opposite side. It's just like I've always said about being an atheist. I don't talk about it that much, not because I'm ashamed of it. It's who I am. It's because, and again, just generalities, there are so many toxic douchebag atheists that I don't want to be lumped in with. Same thing with being a big vax supporter for myself. I couldn't wait to get it because I think this mRNA shit is fascinating. But it still puts you around some of these unbelievably holier than thou elitists that make me want to puke. So it comes from an opposite direction, but I get what you're saying. Spazio says, why do you think CM Punk flopped in the UFC? I liked him. I just don't think he's... The thing is, Spazio, no matter how good an athlete you are, there is a knack for being a fighter to some degree. I think all successful fighters are fighters at heart, and I don't think CM Punk is. And again, just being a good athlete doesn't mean that you'll be able to absorb punishment, because no matter, as a fighter, boxer, UFC, whatever you want, you're going to absorb punishment. Doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to get hit. Some people don't handle it well. And beyond that, the boxing portion, the stand-up portion, is always going to be something that, just like basketball or baseball, you have to have a significant amount of basic aptitude for to be successful, and I just don't think he did. His punches looked horrible. You can, to a degree, you can teach most all of the groundwork. You can be taught Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Some are going to be better than others, but you can be taught Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because it's a matter of making certain moves and maneuvers. But with stand-up, you got to have some level of aptitude where your brain's connected to your fists, and some people don't have it. Willie says, next post, please. I've seen enough Nigerian boobs to say that they're okay. Got to inspect the merchandise. Absolutely. That's true. You never get something the stamp of approval, especially boobs, without having experienced them. I would tend to agree. Shark Dentures says, yep, zealotry of any kind is just evil. For the most part. I mean, unless you're talking about the more fun-loving zealotry, but typically even the fun-loving zealotries can percolate over into evil. You're right. But that goes again with what I was saying. That's why I don't like extremists on either side of the political spectrum. Extremism never gets you anywhere. Never gets you anywhere positive. And I'm not saying there has to be concessions. There has to be a middle ground on everything. I'm just saying everything should be looked at. And some things like voter laws are easy. And our current political climate is what makes it not easy. Again, requiring ID, no brainer. Making as many polling places available as possible, no brainer. And yet you have people on each side that'll fight you on one of those topics. Jack says, I got some side zealotry going. It's about pineapple pizza. That can spill over into violence, though, Jack. Look at the violence here over magenta. That was our serious zealotry here. Oh, guys, I gotta go. Thank you very much for hanging out with me in the stream, and thank you guys so much for being on the first episode of the podcast with me. You guys really, I mean, you make the podcast. It wouldn't be anything without you. I will try and get a regular schedule set up for the podcast. I'm going to try and figure out what my most, as you guys know how crazy my home life is, the time where it'd be most convenient for you guys and yet be a time that I would most likely not to have to cancel super often. But I will figure all that out. But guys, again, thanks so much. I appreciate it. I got to go. I got to let this get posted at YouTube so I can pull it, take the audio out of it, edit it, and get it put up over at the podcast. What do you think of Brock's run in UFC? I think Brock's brilliant. I think what he did as a fighter was fantastic. He started right at the top. He fought with some of the best in the world. So, yeah, I was a big fan. I mean, his lack of experience cost him, particularly. Here's the link to the where the podcast will be. His lack of experience cost him against Mir, especially. But he was fun to watch. All right, guys. Again, thanks very much. And we should be streaming most all the week, as always. And I will see you guys then.